These sourdough scones only take 30 minutes to make from start to finish, and only 15 minutes of that is hands-on time. This is such an easy recipe. It calls for sourdough discard, but you can use active starter or discard. It doesn't really matter. The sourdough starter is not doing the leavening. There's baking powder in this recipe, which is going to do the leavening, which makes it such a quick process. So first you're going to start by making your scone dough. Now scones are very similar to biscuits. In fact, it's almost the same exact thing. When I make scones, I add more butter, so they're more buttery and flaky, and I also add more sugar, whereas my biscuits are more savory. That's just how I do it, but I believe that if you're British, you call them scones, whether they're sweet or savory. So the recipe for 8 scones is going to be 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour, a teaspoon of salt, a half cup of sugar, 4 teaspoons of baking powder. You're going to whisk all of those dry ingredients up in a big mixing bowl, and then add 1 whole cup of cold butter, whether it's cubed or grated. If you do cubed butter, you'll have to cut it in with a fork, but I really like, you saw me using my grater to grate butter. It just makes everything so much easier. And then you're going to add an entire cup of sourdough starter. Like I said, you can use active or discard, it doesn't matter. Then 1 whole egg. I've got a pretty green speckled egg here, just showing you guys my pretty eggs. And if you hear chirping in the background, that's because we just hatched chicks and they're in our house, so they're chirping away. So I added my egg, I added a half cup of milk, 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. Now that's the base recipe. You can customize it, modify it any way that you want and get really creative here. In this video, I'm making a coconut version of these scones, so I did add an entire cup of shredded coconut, and that completes the dough. So when you're making scone dough or biscuit dough, do not overmix and definitely do not knead it like you would bread. You want to handle the dough very gently. As you can see here, I'm just folding it over onto itself just a few times, which is going to create those buttery, flaky layers that we all like in biscuits and scones. And the quicker you work, the better, because you want everything to stay cold. You don't want your butter to start melting. So I did start with cold butter, but I am working quickly as well. So I'm using a cast iron skillet to make these scones, but you can use a baking sheet. I'm going to just shape the dough into a circle and use a bench scraper, but you could use a sharp knife to cut out 8 triangular scones here. Now, the whole time I was doing this, I actually had my standard cast iron skillet preheating in my oven at 425. So these scones bake at a high temperature. It's a very quick process, just 15 minutes in the oven. And why I like to preheat my skillet is because I add a little butter before putting the scone dough in there, and it just gives it like a really nice bottom. So we'll go back, and I was starting to make the glaze on the stovetop there. We'll talk about that in a second, but my skillet is very hot. The oven is preheated to 425, and I've got a couple tablespoons of butter in the bottom of that skillet that is nice and bubbly and brown, and the skillet is well seasoned, so they're not going to stick or anything. I have blog posts on all this stuff, by the way. If you don't know how to make a sourdough starter, I've got a blog post on that. If you don't know how to season cast iron, I've got blog posts on that, so I'll link all of that for you. But these fit perfectly inside of a standard skillet. So once I get these in here, then I will throw them back into the oven and bake at 425 for 15 minutes. And while these are baking, I will work on my glaze. So I am pairing these coconut scones with a white chocolate glaze. You don't have to use white chocolate, but I like it. I think it just pairs really well. Now it's really easy to burn white chocolate, so you want your heat on low and just don't walk away, keep whisking. But what I'm doing here is melting 2 tablespoons of butter plus 2 tablespoons of white chocolate chips. Melt that, and then add in 1 cup of powdered sugar and 2 tablespoons of milk. Whisk it all together, and that's it for your glaze. It's very simple. If you want to leave the white chocolate chips out, you can. I guess you could do just regular chocolate too and make like a chocolate glaze and put chocolate chips in your dough. So many possibilities here. So my scones are finished. I am going to drizzle the glaze over them while they're still hot, and then I toasted some coconut on the stovetop So then I will sprinkle that over these and they will be finished. And they're absolutely delicious, just not dry at all. They're not dry, they're not chewy, they are moist and buttery and flaky. Oh, so good. The full recipe will be linked in the description. Just tap the more button and you will see the recipe as well as the blog post with all the like step-by-step instructions, frequently asked questions, and everything like that linked as well. If you want to see more short recipe videos like this, hit the subscribe button. I do make one really long video every week. It comes out every Wednesday. It's like 30 minutes of just homemaking, homesteading, all that kind of stuff, just lots of stuff. But then I also have a couple of short videos with recipes that come out every week as well.